23, 1 Samuel. We'll break this up, verses 1 through 6, and then 7 to the end of the chapter. So I'll read the first 6 verses. When David was told, "Look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are looting the threshing floors," he inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" The Lord answered him, "Go, attack the Philistines and save Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Here in Judah we are afraid. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the Philistine forces?" Once again David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, "Go down to Keilah, for I am going to give the Philistines into your hand." So David and his men went to Keilah, fought the Philistines, and carried off their livestock. He inflicted heavy losses on the Philistines and saved the people of Keilah. Now Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, had brought the ephod down with him when he fled to David at Keilah. So anyway, this town, Keilah, and that's in the tribe of Judah. It's not far from Jerusalem, to give you kind of a reference point, but that's where it is. And it says, "Look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are looting the threshing floors." Now, Keilah is a walled city. It's got gates that can be barricaded and that type of thing. So to defeat it, you would have to be kind of in a siege warfare type situation, and that would have been the case. So one thing that's interesting here, when you've got siege warfare, battles, that kind of stuff, people being slaughtered and everything, why on earth would the key thing you're upset about be looting the threshing floors? Why would God, of all the things they're doing wrong, why would God and David be most upset about that? There's 3 possibilities, and all 3 may be one reason together. It may be to let David know that they haven't broken into the actual city, because the threshing floors were out of town. They were outside the city walls in most cases. They could be taken inside because Gideon chose to do his threshing in a wine press because he couldn't be seen there, and he did it at night. But anyway, it could be to indicate that the Philistines hadn't broken into the city yet and weren't actually slaughtering the people. But there's another reason that's possible, and turn to Numbers chapter 18. In Numbers 18, verse 27, and God's presenting the laws, how you tithe and all that kind of stuff. It says, "Your offering will be reckoned to you as grain from the threshing floor or juice from the winepress. In this way, you also will present an offering to the Lord from all the tithes you receive from the Israelites. From these tithes you must give the Lord's portion to Aaron the priest." So, what were the Philistines doing as far as a relationship to God? They were stealing the Levites' tithe. So now, what are they doing? They're going directly against God. They're stealing from God. That may be the importance of mentioning the threshing floor. Because if they're taking all that grain, they're taking God's tithe, because that grain was given to the Levites. Levites in turn offered it to God. So not only could it indicate they hadn't broken into the city yet, also they're stealing from God. And the third possibility, the reason David may have mentioned this or been actively irritated about the situation of looting the threshing floor, may be because of his great-grandmother. What did she do? What was her occupation? She was a thresher of grain. That's how she got Boaz. She worked on the threshing of grain. That's what got her recognized by Boaz. So look at Ruth chapter 2, verse 17. And she was real good at it, too. We're not going to read that. She produced an amazing amount of grain. So, verse 17, so Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. So, she cut it down all day long, and then at night, the next step is she separated the grain from the chaff, the wheat from the chaff, or the barley from the chaff. So the woman was working all the time. So that's what his great-grandmother did. So David might be thinking and just seeing in his mind, my great-grandmother could be out there doing this, and they are stealing from her. And then also in 3:2, it says, Is not Boaz with whose servant girls you have been a kinsman of yours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you were there until he has finished eating and drinking. So that's where she met Boaz. Odd meeting place, wouldn't it? So anyway, all of these reasons could be why God chose to use that is what he was most upset about. He's letting David know they haven't got inside. He's advocating, hey, they're stealing my stuff. So that would be a reason to go kill Philistines. And third, he might be thinking about what his great-grandmother did, and that really irritates him. So he wants to straighten this out. But you notice David has returned to God. He's back. I'm ready to listen to him. So the first thing he does, he doesn't run off and attack the Philistines. He asks God in verse 2, he inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go and attack these Philistines? The Lord answered him, Go, attack the Philistines and save Keilah. So David doesn't just rush off and do it. He asks God. God says, yes, go get them. And he gives them, God gives his blessing and permission to go do that. But David's men are scared. If you look at verse 3, it says, But David's men said to him, Here in Judah we are afraid. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the Philistine forces? So how are you going to go attack an enemy and your army is afraid of just being in their home tribe town? That's not a very good way to start a battle, is it? So once again, David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, Go down to Keilah, for I am going to give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah, fought the Philistines, and carried off their livestock. He inflicted heavy losses on the Philistines and saved the people of Keilah. So David was confident to go when God said go, but his men weren't. They were very blunt. We're scared to even be where we are, much less go attack the Philistines. So David asked God again, and God said, Go and attack them. I'm going to give them to you. What caused that change? Well, we see that God's been asked twice, should we go? The first time David asked God, and it was private. David was told by God directly through the priest, and I'll tell you why, the high priest, to go. His men didn't hear that. That was a private conversation. So they're scared. They don't know what God's told David. And they have seen David be a little reckless on his own when he was just headstrong about what he was going to do. So, verse 6 and 9 help explain that. Verse 6 says, Now Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, had brought the ephod down with him when he fled to David at Keilah. And then verse 9 says, When David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, Bring the ephod. So the importance of this, you remember David has a high priest now, and he also has a prophet. Gad's the prophet, Abiathar's the high priest. When it says he brought the ephod, in that garment that covered the high priest is the Urim and Thummim. That's the two stones that they would cast to get approval from God. That's often how they found out what God's will was. The high priest would cast the stones, the way they landed, and we don't know all the details about that, so that's about as much detail as you're going to get. And depending on how they rolled out or landed, it was either God's will to go or God's will not to go. And so that priest probably went to David, and in private they asked God, and God answered. The second time, the same thing would have been done, but it would have been public. That's why the men were ready to go. The second time, David probably brought the high priest out and asked the question, does God want us to go? High priest cast the stones, and yes, God says go. And immediately the men were encouraged, their fear was gone, and they're ready to go. So David's totally returned to relying on God to guide him in what he's doing. And also his men are relying on God to guide him in what he's doing. So the situation is they're ready to go, and they were successful. God said, I'll deliver them into your hands. They ended up looting the Philistines, driving them away from the town, and saving that town from the Philistines. So David was successful there. Now, the rest of the chapter is about Saul going after David. And think about what Saul's going to do here. It says, Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah, and he said, God has handed him over to me, for David has imprisoned himself by entering a town with gates and bars. So, God hasn't delivered David to Saul. First of all, this shows you how Saul could care less about what God wants unless it suits Saul. And then he just makes it up. David's been delivered into my hand because he's trapped in a walled city. And then in verse 8, and Saul called up all his forces for battle to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. So look at how much hatred Saul has for David. He hates David so bad that he's going to attack his own people. He's willing to destroy an Israelite city, if need be, to get David. That's how bad that hatred is. That he's willing to do that. So, with that situation in mind, it shows you how evil and ruthless Saul is. And so again, David wants guidance. And we read verse 9, and he called the high priest, and David said, O Lord God of Israel, your servant has heard definitely that Saul plans to come to Keilah and destroy the town on account of me. So, David's not just taking the rumors that Saul's coming after him as gospel. David wants to find out for himself, is this true? And who does he go to? He goes to God. And God answers him, and probably here again through the high priest. And David also asked the question, will the people of Keilah that I just saved from the Philistines turn against me? And the answer to both questions is yes. Yes, Saul is coming after you. He knows where you are. He's going to kill you if he can. Answer to that is yes. Secondly, are the people of the town that I just saved going to turn me over out of fear to protect themselves? And the answer to that is yes also. So, how quick did these people turn on David? 1 second they would have been cheering him because he saved them from the Philistines, but then when the going gets tough, they're ready to dump David and give him over to Saul to kill him. So there's a message in that alone. You got people are people. People are concerned mainly with themselves and go with whatever's convenient and what's to their best interest, regardless of whether it's right or wrong. And that's what God's showing here. He's showing human nature throughout the Bible. And this is one of those cases. So with that situation, David has reason to be concerned. So again, David asked, he really can't believe this. In verse 12 he said, will the citizens of Keilah surrender me and my men to Saul? And the Lord says, they will. So the first time David doesn't even believe that to be true, so he asks the question again. And verse 13 is interesting. So David and his men, about 600 in number, left Keilah and kept moving from place to place. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he did not go there. So the city's been spared. David leaves, does what's best for the people, and the city's spared. But also, he's got 200 more men now than he did when this started. It's not often you go into a battle, like when he was saving Keilah from the Philistines, that you go into a battle and come out with more soldiers than you went in with. So you see God's blessing David all the time. His army's getting bigger, not smaller. He's been in a battle. His army's gotten bigger, not smaller. And yet he's still doing it with a tiny amount of men with him. So only God could provide that success and that strength. Verse 14, David stayed in the desert strongholds and in the hills of the desert of Ziph. Day after day Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands. This is a case where you need to have faith in God to take care of you. He will take care of his own, but it may be very difficult. But he's still in charge. Do you think this would be a pleasant lifestyle that David's living in? He's running from a maniac that's trying to kill him. He's got to be concerned about 600 men that have chosen to follow him. His living conditions would stink. How many people would like to live in a desert and be running from place to place, place to place, through mountainous, craggy terrain, trying to find water all the time, trying to find food all the time, just the basic necessities of life, on top of somebody trying to kill you. So his life was not easy. David's life was never easy. But what did God do? He protected him from Saul. Even though David was having to go through all these hardships, it says God did not give David into his hands. Verse 15, the rest of it, while David was at Horish in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And so, again, Saul hasn't given up on this. He's still, think about how self-centered this is too. The Philistines are everywhere. That's should be Saul's main job is protecting his kingdom. What's he doing? His entire army is traipsing all over his own country after David, and the Philistines are doing pretty much what they want to as far as invading different towns and villages and plundering them and that type of thing. So Saul's not doing anything that he should have as a king. So in verse 16, or 15 through 18, David's reunited with Jonathan. And this shows the need for close friends and contacts that are godly people, because they can provide strength in rough times that nobody else can. It says that in verse 16, and Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Isn't this an odd situation? The son of the man the king was trying to kill you has come to you and encouraged you and strengthened your faith in God. The most unlikely sources of godly friendship can be the most comforting. And they haven't spoken since the last time, I forget what chapter it was in, but when they left, they haven't seen each other for years. And yet that friendship is still there. That covenant that they made with each other is still there. That love that they have for each other in God and friendship is still there. And I'm sure this was difficult for Jonathan to get away and go visit David without Saul and his entire army and spies don't know about it. At least not now they don't. So with that being the case, Jonathan went back home and David remained where he was. And it shows you here too, even though Jonathan was a strong, godly man, and he was David's best friend and willing to protect David at all times, Jonathan here is ready for David to be king and to serve him. And that's what Jonathan thinks is going to happen. But what we think is going to happen, no matter how close we are to God, that doesn't necessarily mean that is what's going to happen. Because God's plan is more perfect than ours, and He knows what's best for everybody. So, even though Jonathan's totally accepting of David as being king, Jonathan is going to be killed. And he's not going to serve David under his kingship. So, on top of everything else, in verse 19, there's always somebody that thinks they're going to get a favor if they side with the person that's the strongest, or at least appears to be the strongest. And that's what happens here. The tribe, the Ziphites, in verse 19, went up to Saul at Gibeath and said, "Is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh on the hill of Hachilah, south of Jeshimon? Now, O king, come down whenever it pleases you to do so, and we will be responsible for handing him over to the king." So on top of Saul hunting for David, now you've got the tribe, the enemy tribe, basically, the Ziphites, are taking this opportunity to hunt David down and give him to Saul, expecting favors from Saul for their help. And so, verse 21, again, the hypocrisy of Saul, says, Saul replied, "The Lord bless you for your concern for me." How hypocritical could that be? Saul has no relationship with God whatsoever. And yet, this sounds good, doesn't it? And it's going to sound good to the people. Oh, Saul's asking for God to bless these people. Saul could care less about God blessing anything. He doesn't even believe what he says. But he says it, and so in verse 22, "Go and make further preparation. Find out where David usually goes and who has seen him there. They tell me he is very crafty." find out about all the hiding places he uses and come back to me with definite information. Then I will go with you if he is in the area. I will track him down among all the clans of Judah. So, what better to happen if you wanted to find David? The people that live there, the people that live in that terrain, they're going to find David. Keep him put till Saul can get there and kill him. And that's not a bad battle plan, but a lot of times it doesn't work. We used that plan in Afghanistan. We used that plan in Vietnam. How did that work out for us? Where's the people's real loyalty to themselves and their own people? And that tendency started a long time ago. Oh, if we can get the people that live here in this ungodly terrain that we've got to navigate, and they know all the passes and valleys and crags and oases and places to get water, and they're on our side, then we can use that information and go directly to where the problems are. And that was one of our tactics in both those situations. And it does not work well. But anyway, that's what Saul was counting on right here. He sets up a battle plan based on the people that live there to help him root out David and find him, and then he would go kill him. So they set out and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now David and his men were in the desert of Moab. I'm not going through all these words. And Saul and his men began to search, and when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed in the desert of Moab. When Saul heard this, he went into the desert of Moab in pursuit of David. So think about 600 men trying to hide from 20,000, 30,000. Be a tough job. But who's in charge of this situation? Look at verse 26. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul saying, "Come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land." So finally, it got so bad with the Philistines attacking the entire nation of Israel that Saul had to leave. Who do you think's in charge? God. Plain as the nose on your face. Just at the right time, out of nowhere, a problem arises that was so bad that Saul had to leave what he was doing, as bad as he wanted to kill David, and go and fight the Philistines. So, verse 28 says, Then Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. That is why they call the place Selah Hamalekah. And David went up from there and lived in strongholds of En-Gedi. And those strongholds are places that were almost impenetrable. It'd like to be living on Taylor's Mountain in Bedford, if anybody knows about that. If there's a place you want to get away from the law and hide, and they weren't coming after you, it was Taylor's Mountain in Bedford, because they were scared to death, law enforcement, to go to Taylor's Mountain. And that's what this would have been like. It would have been, places to hide. People would hide you, impenetrable. You're not going up there and look for it. It's suicide. So God has provided for David through all this mess. He's guided Saul away from him. He's forced things to happen, and he's protected David, even though David's life is extremely difficult and extremely just the total mental stress as well as physical stress that he's going through would be unbelievable. But God gets him through it, protects him, And David's strength and faith in God is going to grow greatly as he keeps going through more and more situations like this.